travel is one of those integral ways of becoming more complete people. So it's surprising it's not part of every educational conversation. Kim Anderson is going to take us there. Kim is someone who has travel in her very being and has found ways to make it a part of her life so that her spirit can soar. And she wants to support all of us to do the same. Kim finds people to be inherently kind and recognizes that this is not the message we usually get from the media. So she encourages us and the youth of today to find this out for themselves. You're going to hear how easy it actually is to make alternative choices so that travel becomes a part of our lives instead of just a dream or something we see on a screen. You're going to hear some conversations about how even local travel can change the way the global youth can learn to interact in more peaceful and productive ways, and the programs Kim is beginning to promote so that the youth in her area have those opportunities. You can hear more eye-opening conversations about topics that are connected to educational practices at Doodles with Donna, and activities that promote seeing issues from many different perspectives that will give your students more ways of interacting with students from other cultures at scaffoldingmagic.com. Right now, get your maps out because you're going to want to start planning your next trip to places you've just so far dreamed about. Kim talks about living more intentionally, living through your most sacred visions, and really living. Kim, welcome. I've been listening to a bunch of your podcasts, and it's been an absolute pleasure. Brings up so many questions for me. And what I want to do is tie in your obsession of travel and your knowledge about travel to the educational focus I have. And I think that it's very easy bridge into it. The way I see it is that my focus is education, and so it's the center. And then there's these concentric circles. And as we go out, there's so many different things that are affected by education and affect education. And travel is one of those, sort of a bypass that circles around education, because how we are educated at home and in the school affects how we travel. And I didn't really realize that until I listened to the trailer of your podcast. And that's where I want to begin, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
What you talk about, and I encourage everybody to listen to your podcast because they're fascinating and I need to know more about it. And I traveled when I was 26 and almost 40 years ago, not quite 40 years ago, but when I was 26, I traveled around the world on my own. It was a year and I hitchhiked around the world. So there's some things that we have in common. And I'm fascinated by the fact that people are still doing it because I didn't know that it could still be done. But what I wanted to sort of begin with was your attitude about travel, because you love it. And I have traveled. I love it, but I don't love it the way you do. So let's talk about it. Tell us about travel and what it means to you.
Okay, yes. Travel, if you could say travel is a love language, it definitely is for me. And I find through travel, my soul is really fulfilled with new experiences. And traveling the world and connecting with humans all across the globe really shows me how connected we are as a species and how kind people are. And because I genuinely love people and being around people and having conversations and just talking about the big things in life, I love that traveling the world allows me to do that and connect. It brings all of the facets of life together into a common bond. And it's like, it's kind of like if you're a surfer and you meet another surfer, you automatically speak the same language. And that's what travel is for me. It's like when I meet another traveler, we automatically have a bond of some sort. And that's one of the things that I love, is the connection that it brings through that passion and that shared love.
There's a couple of things that you say, and what I heard most when you're talking about traveling was, I feel like I'm home. And you say, it's ironic that I feel like home because I am not actually in my home, but you feel like home. And I kept thinking about it. When I was traveling at 26 around the world, I was looking for myself. I didn't know who I was, and I knew that I needed to push myself. What I realize now, and I live abroad, I live in Spain now, and I'm comfortable, but it took me a long time to get comfortable, and I've lived in other countries. So when I was thinking about why you feel at home, I was wondering if it's because you really are in tune with yourself. And if you're a person who is very in tune with yourself, then you can absorb what you're seeing and not react to it. How does that sound?
Yes, I feel like there is definitely truth in that statement. And I think that for me, because freedom is such an important facet of my being, that when I am traveling, I am freest to be me. And I don't have the societal pressures of trying to live, quote unquote, the normal life or this boxed in way of living. And so I am comfortable. I'm more comfortable in my own skin as I move around the world than I have been over the last handful of years where I've tried out this sedentary life in middle America. I have felt like a fish out of water the entire time trying to be in one place. And I think that's because it's not being true to my nature, which is a free spirit.
I need to go back to that. I want to go into this feeling at home by traveling, and I'm going to propose something else, and you tell me what you think about it. I told you that I was going to tie travel into education. So tell me what you think of this. The other thing that I was sort of meditating on, and I was listening to your podcast last night. So I sort of, human nature is when you listen to it at night, it's something that sort of revolves around your head while you're sleeping. And I needed to do that because it was a conundrum for me. Why is it that you were so passionate about traveling and feel at home? And I was actually fearful. What I realized is that when I travel, I feel like there's a right and a wrong way to travel. And that's not what you're saying. So what I'm wondering is, in education, a lot of times we go into the classroom and the teachers tell us there is a right and a wrong answer. That may be what we're taking outside as well. There's a right way to do something when you're traveling and a wrong way. If you are at home, if your parents don't validate who you are, again, you're not a person who is very secure traveling. You may do it, but you're not completely secure. And it sounds like that's the opposite of what your experiences have been.
Yes, it is. It's one way to kind of describe it is when there are nomadic, in days of nomadic tribes, those people were home wherever they were because they had what they needed, and what they needed, they could bring with them. They had everything they needed in life. And if they needed something else, they would go to another area and find whatever that particular thing is that they need. And for me, when I travel, sometimes I need relaxation, and the ocean is definitely my spirit equal. Like I need the ocean, like I need breath in my lungs. And so sometimes I just need some time, some downtime in the ocean. And so I will go to a place that can give me that physical thing of what it is I need, that environment. And sometimes I need culture and history, and I need to kind of connect to roots, so I might make a trip back to where I was born, or I might base myself in Europe for a little while. So within myself, I guess it is kind of going back to your previous question. There is a self-attunement to seeing what is it that I need in life right now, and going to that place, that geographical location that can give me what I need. And sometimes I want to feel so outside of my comfort zone to test where am I right now in life? Like I need to feel a little uncomfortable to get comfortable with where I am at that moment. So I might choose like some place in Asia where I feel like a foreigner, like those moments where I'm like, it is a little uncomfortable. I don't know how to navigate this. What is the system? So where some people might take a class or have a conversation with a friend that's near, I can do those things through choosing a different location to be in. Does that answer your question?
Sure, in part because it's your truth, but we're going to keep exploring it if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
You traveled by yourself. I traveled by myself. Part of that is what you say. There's a certain independence that you can't find in any other circumstance. You earn a certain amount of money, or you have a certain amount of money, and then you go travel. So you don't have to think about it. You have planned for the trip, and all you have to do is experience the trip. I think that's probably a little different for families, or for two people traveling together, three people traveling together who depend on each other. There's a little bit of difference. But yeah, there's something very freeing about traveling by yourself. And I also loved your comments about how easy it is to find people on the hostel route. And it's a beautiful kind of relationship you can form when you're on those trips. Let's go back to your upbringing then. You say you're a fish out of water. You grew up in Illinois. You grew up on a farm. How was it that you started finding this love of travel?
I was the kid that said yes to, and these are things that I realized later in life, but I was the kid that said yes to every slumber party, yes to every school event, yes to everything that gave me a new experience. I loved doing new things. And I was raised in an era where you kind of raised yourself a little bit, the latchkey kid era of some sort, even though, I grew up in such a rural area. We didn't even have a key to our house. Like, it was never locked. You don't lock the car. If someone gets in the car to drive the car and the keys aren't in it, it's like irritating. It's like, well, where are the keys? Like, why aren't the keys in the car? And so I had a couple of pivotal moments in high school. Like, I always traveled. I was in 4-H and FFA, agriculturally centered programs. And I got to travel a lot through those. And in FFA in high school, I won 2 trips. They were each year I won a trip. One was to Washington, D.C., and one was to Boulder, Colorado. And those were like the furthest geographical distances I had been. And I just was like, oh my goodness, there's a whole world out here. And the first time I'd seen the Rocky Mountains, it blew my mind. And I came home, I'm like, I want to go to UC Boulder. And my parents like, no. And I probably now looking back, that was a financial decision, but that wasn't explained. It was just like a hard no. And so the trip that actually really cemented travel for me was in university. A group of us, I don't know, there might've been a dozen of us. We had this big 15-passenger van and we left. I went with some people from the other university in town, and we drove from Indiana to the Havasupai Indian Reservation in Arizona. And it was about a 24-hour drive. And then we hiked down into the Havasu Canyon. And it was the first time I had backpacked, where I literally carried everything I needed on my back. We stayed in there for like a week and hiked back out. And it was transformational, where I just realized there was so much more out there and I could see it. And so I could go there. I could explore these things. And so it was a slow progression for me. And I won't lie, like after university, I had a boyfriend. He was going to graduate school in Hawaii, and he was like, come with me. And I said, yes, not for necessarily the relationship probably, but I was like, oh, Hawaii sounds like fun. It was wild. I just said yes to the thing that I was like, yes, that seems like the right idea. I'd graduated from university. I had no idea where I was going, what I wanted to do. And I fell in love with the ocean in Hawaii. And I have traveled around the ocean because it's my love since then. And so that answers your question all, but
yes, you're answering all the questions. I mean, what I'm hearing is that university educated you cognitively, but it didn't necessarily fill your soul, and that you were still looking for something that mattered to you in the world. And you thought you'd find your heart's desire in Hawaii. And it turned out not to be your boyfriend, but rather the ocean, which from that point on became a major character in your life. What about your friends? Your friends have stayed in the place where you've grown up, or have they been following you around?
Most all of my friends from high school, they've all moved elsewhere. My university friends, most of them predominantly, they either stayed in the town we went to university in, or they went back to their hometowns. I went to university in Indiana. And so a lot of them went back to that. Yeah. Most of my traveling friends and people that I've met on the road, I keep in contact with. The ones that stayed where they are through university, I see and speak with them less.
So it sounds as though the people you feel you have the most in common with are those who went outside their comfort zone, who left the environment they grew up in and used their abilities, or they're pushing their abilities to improve, to search for different experiences, and are open to others who also push themselves. And I find that fascinating because, as I mentioned, I live in Spain and I'm from New York City. So I chose to live in a really small town because I find that comforting. I feel I found my little corner of the world. But I still have a very global perspective. Where I live, though, family is the number one priority. Everything revolves around the extended family, and I don't think I'd be mistaken when I say that it's taboo not to consider the entire family's best interest before your own. So in one respect, if your family can feed you body and soul, then that should be enough in the world. Having people you can depend on for anything is incredibly grounding. When I was traveling, I told you I was looking for a family. I didn't have one I could depend on at that time, so I was traveling around the world looking for one. But on the other hand, I've traveled around the world, and I still travel as part of my work, and it's very fulfilling and it's important. I need to get outside the routine of a small town, or even if I lived in a bigger city, I need to get out of the routine and experience the world personally. So it's difficult for me as an educator to see that although in schools here there's a push to bring global perspectives into the classroom, that's most of the time as far as it goes. There's a lot of fear about leaving the family unit, and this dichotomy is frustrating for me and for them if I talk about it with them, and I try not to. So I'm just wondering from you what you could say about that. What can travel give us that staying at home cannot? If having family is grounding, is travel unsettling?
I really love this question. It's one of the things that for me over the years, when you just have one of those conversations in life with an individual that you meet for whatever happenstance occurs, and the more the conversation progresses, and eventually you'll get to how you were raised or what their educational background is. And some of the most interesting people I have ever met in my life, and some of the best conversations I've ever had, were people that were educated in an alternative method, as in they didn't go to a classroom and sit down and do it that way. And I traveled with a family who were cruisers. So they lived aboard their sailboat. They had been traveling the world for, I think, 6 or 7 years when I joined them. And their son, Andy, was 12. And he'd always been, just world schooled. He did have a homeschool type curriculum. That had evolved over the years, but he was primarily world schooled. That wasn't a term at the time like it is now. And all he wanted was a home and a place to stay, because he'd only ever known this nomadic life. So it was sort of like the grass is greener. He really wanted to try that. And I know for my son growing up, he lived with his dad when he was younger, and he had a very traditional school life, went to school, and he kind of lived on West Kauai, and it was a bit rough for him. There is a bit of racism, reverse racism in Hawaii. And he was in a very local community. It was tough for him, but he had that. And now he came to live with me, and he still had a traditional schooling, but we've incorporated a lot more travel into that. And now he's in a program where, he's in Mexico right now for 3 weeks on a school program, and he's learning because he came from a very traditional life. He felt unsettled a little bit in the movement. And now I think that he's had some movement. He's kind of settling into that balance between moving and tradition. And so, life is a little bit of a roller coaster in our wants and needs and how we feel that we settle into a place. And I think that it can be very settling. And then I think sometimes you need moments of grounding. So I think it can be both. And I think that's the beauty of creating an intentional life that incorporates travel, is where you can decide what it is that you need at that point. An intentional life that incorporates travel is where you can decide what it is that you need at that point.
What I hear you saying is that having alternative ways of experiencing the world is valuable, even though it may seem unsettling. The boy you met who spent his life traveling wanted nothing more than being literally grounded, and your son who had a settled life in Hawaii wanted something more. But the loss of one solid center of being grounded was challenging for him. So extremes don't work. We need to find balance in life. What is the most important thing you want your son to get out of this trip?
An understanding of the abundance around him. He's in a community. They're doing a wide variety of sort of mission work. And so it's the first time he's seeing real poverty, and he's always been pretty grateful as a human. He's always just been a very kind and loving individual. But I think that as an only child, he's maybe not understood the amount of possibilities that he's really been given, like truly know that it's just been a given. And I hope that as he sees other children and other communities, that it will open his eyes up to the abundance that he has and has been given, to know that it's not a given in life necessarily. There are kids that don't have those same opportunities. And so I hope that he finds the commonality in humanity, and also the understanding of the beauty of the life that he's been given.
What I hear you saying is that his education now includes seeing different ways people exist on the planet. So while his class lessons are important, they'd never be able to simulate the social skills, the empathy he's probably developing by living amongst people of very different backgrounds on many different levels, right? When you say abundance, I don't hear just financial abundance that he's privy to, but also the abundance of possibilities that you've held open for him, that you've encouraged him to have, having such an open mind yourself. So the logical question now is, Kim, have you ever been involved in creating programs for children your son's age or even younger to have more opportunities to travel? Has that ever been on your radar of things that might be part of your soul contract, we could say, to fill?
It is actually, I have spoken with some educators over the years in how to incorporate more travel or more education around travel in their classrooms. One of my desires in the world is I want to create an organization, or it's not a scholarship program, but an organization that allows kids in rural America to travel, to get some time around the world. So sort of a nonprofit where I can help people incorporate travel. Some of these kids where I was raised, some of them have barely left the county, so I think that especially in parts of the country in the United States where there isn't access to a lot of things, that it might provide them with the fire of opportunity that is available for them. So that's something that's on my radar to create, even though it's not something I've necessarily done much of yet.
Okay, so I don't have the answer for this, and I'm asking you because it's really just coming into my mind now. We want these opportunities for rural kids or for inner city kids, we could say, to, to have more opportunities in life, to travel, to get to know people outside of their circle and their neighborhood. Does it help in the end? What is our goal? Is it possible that they just go home and are frustrated, or is our goal for them to go back home and get educated so that they can leave their neighborhoods or improve their own neighborhoods? What do you think?
I think for me, it's even a little more basic than that. And it's just providing a new perspective. That's all. If it can generate a new thought, if it can open an ideology window that they didn't have before, however they apply that to life, it really is just showing them that there are more opportunities, differences, and similarities in the world than they might know. So for me, it would be just providing the perspective of opportunity, and they can do with it. It would be great to be able to provide a scholarship for whatever after that. I really just, for me, it's breaking through the noise, breaking out of the box, and showing them that there is a different life than you see on television, than you hear from your parents, than you get from this curriculum that you're involved in. It's just providing a new perspective in general that they can run with however they see fit.
Yeah, I see it as very valuable. I grew up in New York. My parents had the perspective of travel is essential. Learning language is really important so that you can feel more comfortable. Living in Manhattan means that we literally looked out into the sea. And so our perspective in life is looking towards Europe. When you live on the East Coast, it's easier to remember that there are other countries. As you move inland, the United States is so big. And I never realized how big it is until I lived in Europe. When you live in the states that are more in the interior, there's no reason to remember that there are countries outside of the United States because we have everything. But having said that, we really get into our routine, and not just routine of doing things, but thinking. So it sounds like what you're doing is trying to give children, the youth growing up, a different way to see the world so that they can just open up different conversations. Does that sound right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Middle America is so interesting because, you hear about poverty in the United States, but it's typically almost from the perspective of urban areas. And, there's a lot of conversation about how can we help inner city kids? How can we do these? And all of those things are necessary. But there's a whole swath of youth and people in Middle America, this massive geographical area where the nearest major city, like to where I am now, is St. Louis. It's 2 hours from my house, 2.5, 3 hours from, Middle America has no public transportation. You can go north and south on the Amtrak, but there are no buses, very little. it's so complicated and inefficient that people just don't use it. So their exposure is really very little. Like if someone takes a trip, they might go to Disneyland one time, like that might be the trip of their lifetime. There really is such little exposure. So that means what they're getting is primarily from the news or from the generation ahead that grew up in the same environment. And so what they see is the world is mean, people are unkind, there's violence everywhere, it's unsafe. And those are the messages. And it's so not true. Like the one thing, and I have said this for all of my years of travel, is humans are inherently kind. They will always help. When you need help, they're there, and it will come out of the blue, and you'll meet people and be friends with them for a lifetime. And it might have been because you had no idea where you were going on the subway, whatever it is. And so, yes, providing a perspective that the world is actually much different than what you would see or hear if you never left.
Brings up a really interesting conversation. You say that humans are essentially kind. This has to do with social media. This has to do with media in general, movies we see, news. I don't watch the news because I don't want to know, because it's sensationalism. You're saying that travel is safe, although you do have one podcast on ways to make sure that you're keeping safe, and most of it is intuition. What I'm wondering is if the youth today were a little less in tune with social media, if they watched fewer movies, maybe they would be willing to travel more. The messages that we're getting in movies and the messages we're getting in series and on social media are the most sensationalist. And so I'm wondering if we could reduce that, maybe there'd be more trust going out into the world. What do you think?
I mean, sure. Anytime you reduce the negative implication of something, if you can remove that, then it definitely makes it easier to explore other opportunities. And it is really what you focus on. I guess if your social media is focused on gaming, you're going to see violent things, like that's violence comes with video games, not all of them. Would that make a difference? Yeah, I think so. I think it's really just exposure to things that aren't in the popular mainstream. Maybe starting a news media channel that really is only positive. Maybe it's creating social media platforms that promote positivity or real world stories. Maybe it's bringing back, when I was a kid, we had this news thing on the intercom in the morning, like for homeroom, they would video, it was like world news. It was done by kids around the country. And, maybe it's creating, because we're becoming a global world, maybe it's creating global broadcasting systems that go to kids in schools. Like in the morning, you hear from Spain for a little while, you hear from kids in Germany, you hear from the United States, you go to these geographical regions, and it's just somehow showing people what others that look like them or are like them, things that they are doing in the world that are different to where they are. And I don't know if that's a reduction of what we have now, or it's just a promotion of the betterment of it. I'm not really sure the answer to that.
Yeah, I don't think either of us do, but it's an interesting conversation. I think we need to explore it more. I think that a lot of the times that there's fear about people we're not familiar with is simply education. It's simply we don't know anything about them. And the more we become familiar with them in positive ways, which brings me to your podcast, because your podcast is very positive. It sends out a very positive message about travel and about what we can learn from travel. Your podcast is made for adults. Have you ever thought of creating informational platform for students as well, for children, for younger potential travelers?
Well, actually, as you were saying that, I just made a note and I wrote TikTok positivity. And I think that there is definitely room because youth want to see youth, like they want something that's relatable. So creating or using the current platforms, but creating opportunities or channels for kids to see more of that positivity too. So maybe, you have like a social media influencer that's young and travels and promotes this positivity, creating content that goes viral in a positive fashion and target it towards the kids that you're trying to make a change. So that there's definitely, I think, room for that. I hadn't really had that thought until, your question came out at the same time I had that thought.
So let's talk about your podcast. Why did you start it, and what are some of your goals?
I started it really, I missed my community being in this middle American world. My son, he's a junior this year. So he went away. He's in boarding school this year. And so he went away. And so I was like, okay, now I'm here and it's time for me to step into my next level in life and do my next thing. I created it where I could create community and bring positive, inspirational stories of people that are designing the life of their dream. And I'm on this planet to show people the world and to inspire them to live the life of their dreams. Like, I'm very clear that is my role in this facet of Kim and this particular time on earth. And so showing people, I've always been the person sort of living my life, doing my own thing that is out of the ordinary or out of the box. And so to some people. And so I wanted to have those conversations with other people doing that. And now with the internet and digital nomad, like there are so many possibilities in life where people can create the life of their dreams much more easily than it might have been in any other time in history. So I wanted to bring those conversations to people. I wanted to allow them or give them the opportunity to hear from other people that were doing something that might inspire them to step out of their comfort zone a little bit.
Your objectives, Kim, your podcast sound ambitious and generous and intentional on the most positive level. You're empowering people through conversations to live their dreams, to do things they might have only dreamed about before. So I'm going to put this in the lens of education by saying if we have been lucky enough to learn in environments in which we're given the opportunity to develop our creativity in school, then we probably had the bandwidth to consider more creative lives after school. My schooling was pretty traditional in that we had books and worksheets day after day to fill in, and we sat in straight rows and had to look at the teacher in the front of the room all day, every day, where she or he, whichever, told us if we were correct or incorrect. But there were pockets of times when certain teachers were so bored with that same routine themselves that they dropped all those administratively dictated student books and let us shine. Not often, but enough not to squelch all of our free will. I remember one third grade teacher who gave us a phrase every day for a month and then told us to spend the next hour writing stories based on that phrase. So what was that phrase? You're going to love this, Kim. Once upon a time. She said, write once upon a time on your paper and then continue. And we did, while she wrote her own. I remember so clearly having that time to be completely myself and explore my creativity. Whatever I wanted those words to be after once upon a time. So what it sounds like you're saying is that everyone has the potential to write their own once upon a time as adults, right? And so with every podcast, you're giving them one more idea on how they can finish that phrase. So even if your listeners and my listeners didn't have that chance in school, it's still possible, right? Is that how you see it? What exactly in your podcast will people find?
So just provide examples of people that are doing that and give them resources to think about how they can apply that to their life and then decide if they want to do that, they can make it happen.
The other thing, I don't know if it's still possible, but when I was traveling around the world, I worked in restaurants, I worked in the hostels. So I had saved a lot of money because I was working 3 different jobs for 5 years before I decided to leave, and I'd saved up money. But even so, I was working during the year, not completely legally, we could say, but I was working, earning money. And I wonder if that's still possible.
Oh, yeah, it's totally possible. And teaching English as a second language you can do that anywhere. There's also, I did the same thing. I laughed, coming from a farming community. And then I was literally a migrant farmer in Australia, And so as an American, and I was actually over the age of whatever it is where you can get your working visa. There's a reciprocity where you can get a working visa for a year in a lot of places. And so you can work legally. And as an American, I'd never heard of that. I did not have, no one said, hey, there are possibilities for you to actually get a work visa and go to another country and work. You can do whatever you want, but you can work. And so, yes, there are definitely still opportunities to work. There's always cash jobs. There's ways to work in hostels where your accommodation is covered, and sometimes your food. So, there are many, 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 many ways. And I worked in the private yacht industry. I got paid handsomely to travel the world. And it's not a job for everyone. It's definitely a very demanding role, but I traveled the world and got paid well to do it. So there are ways to do it. And I think that is one of the hopes of the podcast, is to, again, exposure to different ways of doing things, because it's going to be a different life than just getting your regular 9 to 5 where you are and working somewhere else. So there's definitely opportunities for that around the world.
Okay, then let's talk about higher education. And you tell me if this is a little out of your comfort zone, but when I was growing up in the East Coast, it was you finish high school and you go right into college. There was absolutely no question about it. And I asked my father if I could take a year break. It's much more common now from what I understand, but when I was growing up, there was absolutely no way they were going to let me do a gap year. I felt that I needed a year to get to know myself. I felt that if I were going to go to college, university, I needed to know what I was doing there, because it was a 4-year commitment. My father was going to pay a lot of money, and I really didn't understand why I was going. So I'm wondering if it's something that you would encourage to do a gap year, and if you think higher education is still important.
I would, as a traveler, I always say take a gap year. I didn't even know about gap years until I met people on their gap year, and it's fully common. Like in colonial countries, they take gap years. Like it is, kids do it, and they know going into it that they're going to take a year before they start university. And it's now becoming a little more known in the United States. But again, the United States is so institutional in its education. It's what you do. It's the systematic program. And do I think higher education is important now? I think much less so. I think that there are so many opportunities. And it's one of those things I have a problem when people are like, university is so expensive and all of I'm like, yeah, it is 100%. I mean, I graduated with student loan debt, but there is so much free education online, and there are specialized programs. And so it really comes down to, are you interested in becoming a nurse, a doctor, a teacher, or can you take these certain business classes that will give you the educational platform you need to start your own business? It really comes down to, what is it that you're trying to do, and work from the end result backwards. Like, okay, if that requires me to have a degree, go for it. Do I think it's necessary? No. And I think it's losing its value over time. It really is. There's so many people doing great things in the world that don't have a degree. It's always, you will find examples for whatever it is you choose to find examples for. If you want to find examples for people that are successful without a degree, you will. If you want to find the statistics that say, someone with a university degree makes blah, 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 more percentage of money, you'll find that statistic as well. It's really all comes down to like living an intentional life. What is it that you want to create? And what are the steps that you need to get there?
Which is another argument for the gap year, to get to know yourself a little better and decide, maybe a liberal arts education is not what I need. As interesting as it was, as valuable as, because I'm a learner. I mean, I love learning. Yeah. So for me, it was really interesting. Was it necessary? I was an English literature major. I became a teacher. I loved having gone to university. I got my master's, I got my PhD, but because I love learning, it doesn't mean that I did it to change my life, although it did, I have to say. I think it just depends on what you're going to do with it. There are community colleges that are very inexpensive and they're incredibly good, as you say. And let's go back to traveling. Teaching English is a huge business. You can make a really good income traveling and teaching English. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I know a lot of people that do it. I have friends right now. He and I went to high school together. He and his partner live in, I believe, they're in Taiwan now. They were in Korea. They've done it for years. They've lived overseas and taught English. There are so many people that do it. You take one course, you can do it online. I just interviewed someone who that's one of the things she does. I believe she said she did it in a couple of months online, or you can go and do it over a shorter amount of time in person. And then there's a whole program online that you go and you look at where you want to go. What are the requirements? There are a handful of countries that require a bachelor's degree, but the majority of them do not.
That's pretty much what I know as well. And if you want to just get private classes, you can do that while you're becoming certified, if you want to become certified. Yeah. So if you want to work in academy, you need a certain amount of certification. But in the meantime, you can make some very good money just being a private tutor. You need to be a good private tutor, but you can do it. So it's
Yeah.
another benefit of travel. Tell me about one of your favorite interviews on your podcast.
Recently, I interviewed Jake and Michelle Champ. They world school their kids. They travel in a way that I haven't seen other people travel. I think it's because they're not quite budget travelers, but they're not like super ultra luxury either. So they've kind of found this, like they call it comfort travel, but the way they educate their kids and the experiences they've had, I just found so inspiring. Like they have created this life that is phenomenal.
So I think you have a vision, whether you realize it or not, of what travel could do for the youth in America. If you could, and this is the what if question that I love at the end of any conversation, what if you could create a program for travel for the youth in the United States? How do you think that it would change the conversation among teenagers, for instance, or young adults moving into their professional lives?
I think what it might do is connect the dots, because right now we're moving about the world, at such a global rate and with such rapidity, but yet there are pockets of the world where people aren't going anywhere. And so I feel like bringing those people out of that little pocket, they can kind of connect the dots to the other parts of the world. And so, it would be great to bring kids from other rural areas together to do these trips to other places in the world. And I think in doing that, they would see individuals that are in a common time in life as they are, from similar backgrounds as they are, having a new experience together. And I think what that would help do is unify instead of divide. And I think that's the thing that travel does, is it unifies people. You see similarities instead of differences. And anytime that we can do that in life, the world becomes a brighter place. And so through a program like that, it would unify parts of the world that can very easily feel divided because they don't see anything outside that they can relate to.
And I think something that comes up here is that a lot of children think that they know what's going on in the world because of technology. And yet from the way you're explaining it, there's a visceral difference between getting to know someone through social media and being in the country, being in their homes, the smell, the sounds, the spirit of the person. Mm-hmm. What else are the differences between knowing the world through social media or through the technology and actually taking your body and moving to a different place?
Well, it becomes real. It's a difference between watching reality TV and being in reality. It makes it real. It's tangible. You can feel it. Like you said, you can smell it. You can hear it. You get the feeling of where you are or where that place is. It's kind of like when I grew up studying history out of a book, and you had these timetables and these paragraphs it was so one dimensional. And you go to an art museum or an interactive, exhibit, and you absorb so much more information in that tiny little window than you spent an entire semester looking at black and white on a page. It just allows it to settle within their physical body that this is real. It brings it from the ethers into reality.
And it sounds like travel not only encourages us, but it obligates us to grow and mature, which doesn't actually happen in most educational settings. We're spoon-fed information most of the time if we're in a teacher-directed classroom. So traveling also helps us to understand people in different ways so that we become more compassionate. We understand why they make certain decisions, why they live certain ways, why they make certain choices. And this helps us on a global level by promoting communication instead of aggression, right? I mean, I found that it builds empowerment, but it also made me want to learn more by myself, not just what was offered in school. So if, say, the programs you're proposing in your area, the students begin traveling locally, then they automatically begin building local communities, which can later lead to national and then even international communities. I actually didn't know that travel was so challenging in Middle America. And so if we can find ways to get our rural youth into the cities and our city youth into the country, that's travel, isn't it?
Oh, 100%. Absolutely. Anything that takes someone out of their day-to-day life or their regular comfort zone or something that they see every single day, it awakens that part of you that remembers you are a creator. You are here to experience life. And it gives them something to connect to and maybe dream again. Like if you don't see any examples in your day-to-day basis of anyone doing anything other than some crappy job working for a crappy wage, then some people have a hard time dreaming. And so, yeah, it's just anything that can spark that within them is great.
Okay, well, I really appreciate this. You really have said so many things that are eye-openers, and a part of education is learning to dream again. That's really the message that I hear, which is gorgeous. Yeah. I love it. Yeah. So Kim, thank you so much. And we're going to make sure that we have the links to your podcast and anywhere else for people to reach you so that they can listen to your beautiful conversations with these people who are traveling around the world.
Great. Well, thank you. It's been such a pleasure. I love, education. There's so many ways to educate yourself, and it doesn't come down to sitting in a classroom all the time. So I think that it's a beautiful way to learn who you are, learn what it is you want in life, and see just how that fits in wherever you are. So thank you.
Thank you. Beautifully said. If you haven't already opened up a search engine on the internet to explore trips you've been dreaming about, I'm going to be shocked. For yourself, for your children, for the youth around you, Kim has explained to us how to become more knowledgeable in the most experiential way possible, through travel. Essentially, it's a way to heal cultural misunderstandings, to open the mind to new possibilities, and to fill the soul. It's a supplement to all the other education we get. And all of this has a long-term result of creating a more empathetic and communicative society from the youngest to the oldest people on the planet. I hope you've taken away some of these gems Kim has given us and how she sees travel in the world and how travel is so connected to our overall education. You can find more of a wide variety of educational conversations like this one at Doodles with Donna, and free activities to use inside or out of the classroom to promote open-mindedness at scaffoldingmagic.com. In the meantime, have fun learning about yourselves and the world, and see you soon.